I never suspected the quiet woman scrubbing our floors was the elite operative from the Internal Security Service hidden in plain sight to dismantle a dangerous, organized scheme. When she drew an illegal weapon to save my life from a heavy accusation, I realized the most dangerous person in the hospital was the one we all treated as invisible. I've spent 15 years as the director of City Central Hospital, and in that time, I've learned that the most important people in the building aren't always the ones with MD after their names. But even by my standards, Elena was invisible. She was a small, gray-haired woman who had been cleaning our surgical wings for 3 years. She never complained, never asked for a raise, and moved through the hallways like a shadow. Most of the staff didn't even know her name. They'd walk right past her while she was on her knees scrubbing grout, not even offering a nod of thanks. It bothered me, but in the high-stakes world of hospital administration, I had bigger fires to put out. Lately, those fires were becoming an inferno. The hospital was under immense pressure from a local, organized scheme that had been slowly infiltrating our supply chain. We were seeing a rise in prohibited substances missing from the pharmacy, and I suspected a few of my high-ranking surgeons were involved in a lucrative, illegal trade. I was trying to coordinate an internal audit without tipping them off, but I felt like I was walking through a minefield. One wrong move, and they wouldn't just fire me. They'd find a way to bury me under a heavy accusation that would end my career and my freedom. The tension came to a head on a rainy Tuesday. I was walking toward the intensive care unit when I heard shouting. Dr. Marcus Thorne, our lead trauma surgeon, and a man I'd long suspected of being the ringleader of the group inside our walls, was towering over Elena. He had dropped a tray of medical samples, and red liquid was splattered across the floor and Elena's shoes. "You stupid, clumsy old woman!" Thorne hissed, his face contorted with rage. "Do you have any idea what those samples cost? You were in my way." Elena didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just looked up at him with an expression that was eerily blank. "The floor was marked with a wet sign, doctor," she said quietly. "You were running." Thorne looked like he was about to explode. He raised a hand, and for a second, I thought he was actually going to strike her. I stepped forward, my voice booming through the corridor. "That's enough, Marcus." Thorne froze, his eyes snapping to mine. He lowered his hand, sneering. "She's a liability, Julian. She's ancient and incompetent. Fire her, or I'll make sure the board hears about how you're letting the hospital's hygiene standards slip." "I'll handle my staff," I said, my voice cold. "Go back to your unit." Thorne glared at Elena one last time before storming off. I sighed and knelt down to help her pick up the broken glass, but she gently pushed my hand away. "I've got it, Director. Thank you." "I'm sorry about him, Elena," I said. "He's under a lot of pressure." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I noticed her eyes. They weren't the eyes of a tired cleaner. They were sharp, piercing, and held a level of intelligence that made me feel like I was the one being examined. "Pressure doesn't change who a man is," she said softly. "It just reveals him." I couldn't get that interaction out of my head. Over the next few days, I found myself watching her. I saw the way the other radicals in Thorne's circle treated her, like she was furniture. I decided I was going to help her. I checked her file to see if I could move her to a quieter department, or perhaps offer her an early retirement package with a generous pension. But when I opened her employment folder in the HR database, my blood ran cold. There was no background check, no previous employment history, just a single page with a social security number that didn't flag any results and a home address that led to a vacant lot downtown. That night, the hospital felt different. A heavy silence hung in the air, the kind that precedes a storm. I was staying late to review the internal audit files, trying to find proof of the organized scheme before they could break my life with a criminal charge. As I walked past the executive records room, I noticed the door was ajar. I crept toward the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I expected to find Thorne or one of his lackeys shredding evidence. Instead, I saw a figure sitting in front of the high-security terminal, the one that required a level of encryption only the Internal Security Service should have. It was Elena. She wasn't wearing her cleaning uniform. She was in a dark tactical jacket, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that was impossible for a woman of her age. On the screen, thousands of lines of code were scrolling by, bypassing the hospital's most secure firewalls. "Elena," I whispered, stepping into the room. She didn't jump. She didn't even look up. She just finished her sequence, pressed a final key, and then slowly turned the chair around. In her hand, she wasn't holding a mop or a cloth. She was holding a small, black electronic device that was pulsing with a blue light, a high-end signals jammer. "Director Vance," she said, her voice no longer quiet or submissive. It was the voice of someone used to giving orders to criminals and radicals alike. "You shouldn't have come back tonight. Things are about to get very loud." Before I could respond, the hospital's emergency lights flickered to red, and the intercom crackled to life with a sound I never thought I'd hear in a place of healing. It wasn't a medical alert. It was a lockdown sequence initiated by an outside source. Elena stood up, and for the first time, I saw the holster strapped to her side. "Who are you?" I stammered, backing away. She checked the unauthorized weapon at her hip and looked at the door. "I'm the reason this organized scheme hasn't killed you yet," she said. "Now get under the desk. They're already in the lobby." I dove under the heavy mahogany desk just as the rhythmic, metallic thud of combat boots echoed through the hallway. Not the soft, squeaky gait of nurses, but the purposeful stride of a tactical unit. My breath came in ragged gasps, the smell of floor wax and old paper suddenly suffocating. Through the narrow gap between the desk and the floor, I watched Elena. The quiet cleaner was gone. In her place stood a woman with the focused intensity of a hunting cat. She moved with a terrifying fluid grace, shedding her oversized gray work shirt to reveal a tactical vest and an illegal weapon holstered at her hip. She wasn't an old woman. She was a professional in her prime, her posture straight and her eyes scanning the room like a predator. "Elena, what's happening?" I hissed, my voice cracking with a fear I'd never known. "The organized scheme is moving faster than we anticipated," she replied, her voice no longer a whisper but a sharp command. She checked the illegal weapon with a practiced flick of her wrist. "Thorne isn't just a corrupt surgeon. He's the lead facilitator for a group that's been using this hospital as a shadow hub for years. They realized I've been intercepting their communications. They're here to scrub the site, Julian, and in their world, scrubbing means leaving no witnesses." The office door didn't just open. It was kicked off its hinges with a deafening crack. Two men in dark tactical gear stormed in, their faces obscured by ballistic masks. They didn't look like common criminals from a street corner. They looked like radicals, trained for a coup. The first one swept the room with an unauthorized weapon, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Where is Vance?" he barked, his voice muffled by the mask. Elena didn't wait for him to finish. She was a blur of motion. She used the door's momentum against the first man, slamming it back into his face before he could fire. As he stumbled, she pivoted, delivering a shattering blow to the second man's windpipe. In 5 seconds, both criminals were on the floor, incapacitated. Elena didn't even look winded. She reached down, stripped a radio from one of the downed men, and listened to the chatter for a heartbeat before crushing it under her boot. "I'm with the Internal Verification Service," she said, finally looking at me as I crawled out from under the desk. "We've been monitoring this group for 2 years. We knew they were diverting prohibited substances from your pharmacy, but we didn't realize the scale. They aren't just selling substances, Julian. They've been using the hospital's sterile labs to manufacture heavy accusation materials that could destabilize the entire region." "I thought it was just the meds," I stammered, my head spinning. "I thought Thorne was just greedy." Greed is just the entry fee, Elena said, her voice cold. They've turned your hospital into a fortress, and right now you're the only person who can authorize the internal audit bypass that will let them wipe their digital footprint before the main internal verification teams arrive. Suddenly, the intercom on my desk hissed. It wasn't the page for a code blue. It was Thorne's voice, echoing through the empty office, dripping with a terrifying calm. Director Vance, I know you're in there with the cleaner, but before you do anything heroic, I want you to look at the security feed for the pediatric wing. I think you'll find a very familiar face. My heart stopped. My daughter, Lily, was volunteering in the pediatric wing tonight. My hands shook as I lunged for the computer, my fingers flying over the keys to pull up the camera feed. The screen flickered to life, showing the colorful hallways of the children's ward. But it was empty, except for a single chair placed directly in the center of the hall. Sitting there, tied and gagged, was Lily. Standing behind her, holding an illegal weapon to her head, was my own chief of security, the man I had trusted for a decade. You have 10 minutes to bring the encryption keys to the basement level, Julian, Thorne's voice continued. If I see Elena, or if I hear a single siren, Lily pays the price for your curiosity. Elena grabbed my shoulder, her grip like iron. Julian, look at me, I can get her. But I need you to do something that will risk everything. We have to go to the basement, not to give him the keys, but to trigger the heavy accusation failsafe. It's the only way to lock down the entire grid so they can't escape. We raced down the service stairs, the red emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. The hospital, once a place of healing, now felt like a tomb. When we reached the basement, the air was thick with a sharp metallic tang. We rounded the corner toward the main server room, but we didn't find a group of radicals. We found Thorne standing alone near a row of lead-lined crates, one of which was tipped over, leaking a glowing blue liquid that hissed as it touched the floor. "You're late," Thorne said, gesturing to the leak. "And as you can see, the situation has become unstable. The heavy accusation has already begun." Elena stepped forward, her weapon raised, but she froze when she saw the monitor behind Thorne. It showed the pediatric wing again, but Lily wasn't there anymore. The chair was empty. "Where is she?" I screamed, lunging toward Thorne. Thorne smiled, a slow, sickening expression. He pointed toward the heavy, reinforced steel door of the industrial incinerator behind him. A muffled, frantic pounding was coming from inside the metal chamber. "She's inside, Julian," Thorne whispered, holding up a remote detonator, "and the heat is already rising. You can either save the city by triggering that fail-safe with Elena, or you can save your daughter by giving me the keys. But you only have enough time to do one." Elena looked at me, then at the incinerator, her face pale. "Julian, if you don't trigger the fail-safe, the blue liquid will hit the ventilation system. Thousands will die." I looked at the red lever across the room, then at the steel door where my daughter was screaming for her life. My hand hovered over the encryption key in my pocket as the timer on the incinerator began to count down from 30. "Choose, Director," Thorne sneered. "Who lives and who becomes a heavy accusation?" The timer hit 15 seconds, the red digits glowing like embers in the dim basement light. My world narrowed down to 2 points: the lever that would save thousands and the steel door that held my daughter. Thorne's finger tightened on the detonator, his eyes gleaming with the triumph of a man who believed he had already won. He thought I was a weak administrator who would fold under the pressure of an impossible choice. But he didn't count on Elena. "Julian, the lever, now!" she screamed, but she didn't move toward Thorne. Instead, she reached into her tactical vest and pulled out the small blue light jammer she'd used in my office. With a flick of her thumb, she overcharged the device and threw it with pinpoint accuracy. It didn't hit Thorne. It hit the control panel of the industrial incinerator. The electronics hissed and sparked. The digital timer on the door froze at 8 seconds and then short-circuited, the magnetic locks disengaging with a heavy metallic clunk. "Go!" Elena yelled, pivoting toward Thorn. I didn't wait. I lunged across the slick floor, my shoes sliding in the glowing blue substance as I reached the incinerator door. I grabbed the heavy handle, pulling with every ounce of strength I had. The heat radiating through the steel was terrifying, but the door swung open. Lily tumbled out, coughing and gasping for air, her face streaked with tears. I scooped her up, shielding her body with mine as I scrambled back toward the corner of the room. Across the basement, Thorn roared in frustration. He pressed the button on his remote detonator repeatedly, but Elena's jammer had deadened every signal in the room. Realizing his leverage was gone, he reached for his illegal weapon, his face twisted in a mask of pure malice. "You've ruined everything," he shrieked. Elena didn't hesitate. She didn't use her unauthorized weapon first. She moved with a speed that defied her appearance, closing the distance between them before Thorn could even level his sights. She disarmed him with a brutal, calculated strike to his wrist, the weapon skittering across the floor into the pool of prohibited substances. As Thorn collapsed, Elena didn't stop. She sprinted toward the fail-safe lever. The blue gas was already beginning to swirl upward into the ventilation grates, a silent killer ready to drift through every floor of the hospital. She grabbed the red handle and threw her entire weight into it. With a deafening groan of machinery, the vents slammed shut, and a neutralizing foam began to spray from the ceiling, dousing the leak and Thorn simultaneously. The air hissed as the heavy accusation materials were contained. Silence fell over the basement, broken only by Lily's shaky sobs and the distant sound of heavy boots. The internal verification teams were finally breaching the building. A dozen agents in tactical gear swarmed the room, their flashlights cutting through the settling foam. I looked up to see Thorn being pinned to the floor, his expensive suit ruined, his career and his life over. He would be facing dozens of years for the organized scheme he had built within my walls. He looked at me, his eyes full of hatred, but I didn't care. I just held Lily tighter. Elena stood by the failsafe, her tactical vest covered in neutralizing foam. She looked at the lead agent, a tall man who gave her a sharp, respectful nod. She didn't look like a cleaner anymore. She looked like a commander. "The site is secure," she said into her radio, her voice steady. "The group is dismantled. Begin the internal audit of all medical staff immediately." She walked over to where I was sitting with Lily. She knelt down, her expression softening for the first time since this nightmare began. She reached out and gently patted Lily's hand. "You were very brave, Lily," she whispered. I looked at her, my mind finally catching up to the reality of who she was. "You weren't just a cleaner," I said, a hollow laugh escaping my throat. "You were never just a cleaner." "I was doing my job, Julian," she said, standing up and dusting off her vest. "Sometimes the best way to find the rot in a building is to start with the floors. People don't hide their secrets from the person emptying their trash." "What happens now?" I asked. "The service will take over from here. Your hospital will be under internal verification for a few months, but you're in the clear. You did the right thing." She started to walk away toward the stairs where the agents were waiting. "Elena!" I called out. She paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Will I see you again?" She gave me a small, enigmatic smile, the same one she used to give me when she'd pass me in the hallway with her mop. "I hope not, Director. Because if you see me again, it means something is very wrong with your hospital." She turned and vanished into the shadows of the stairwell. The next day, the hospital was crawling with internal security investigators. Thorn and 6 of our top surgeons were taken away in handcuffs, facing a heavy accusation that ensured they would never see the sun from outside a cell again. The organized scheme was dead. I walked down the surgical wing a week later, my daughter safely back at home. The floors were spotless, reflecting the bright fluorescent lights. A new cleaner was working near the ICU, a young man who looked bored and tired. I stopped and looked at him, realizing that I would never look at a quiet worker the same way again. As I turned to go back to my office, I noticed something on my desk that hadn't been there before. It was a small, polished brass pendant of a shield left right next to my computer. Underneath it was a small handwritten note on a yellow, sticky pad. "Keep the floors clean, Director. I'm always watching." I looked out my window at the city skyline, finally breathing a sigh of relief. The hospital was safe. The radicals were gone. And I knew that somewhere out there, a quiet woman was picking up a mop, waiting for the next organized scheme to make a mistake.